So we're going through what I call an AI pandemic. And before you think I'm being dramatic here, hear me out on this one. One of the things that I'm noticing as I try to build large scale applications and try to get them production ready is the sort of silent bias towards one specific framework. If you've been coding with AI for any given time or trying to experiment with these tools, you would have probably noticed this. That's what I want to talk about in this video. I'm going to try to give you my observation of what I'm seeing in the industry right now as a whole, which I think is a problem. And then I'm going to try to give you some alternative solutions to try and mitigate this. The truth is I don't have an answer to the entire problem, but I just want to kind of talk about it. And what I'm hoping is that we as a community, as a developer community, as a business community, we can kind of start a dialogue around this topic and share some ideas of what are the things that's working for you and how you're working around some of these problems. Okay, so with that, let's just jump right into sort of the topic and what it is. So when I say we're going through an AI pandemic, I genuinely mean this. Like, I know I sound a little bit dramatic here, but this is really a very serious thing for me. So if you've been trying to vibe code for any given period of time, you would have noticed that all of the code for most of the models have been, first of all, JavaScript, and then secondly, Next.js. So every single application that's coming out of any one of these AI models, for the most part, has been Next.js. Second to that would be Python, but I'm not talking about sort of like if you're just generating sort of random code to run on a desktop. I'm talking about if you're trying to build a web application and you ask any of the model without specifying the language to give you a to-do application, for instance, you would have noticed that the first thing that it does is start to generate Next code. And for me, that's a problem. Why is that a problem? Because my predominant framework is Nuxt.js. I'll show you what I mean by that in a sec. The language that I use in terms of for front-end development is Nuxt.js, and it's kind of a cousin to Next.js. So it's kind of close, and the models will try to work around. If I insist in giving me Nuxt code, it will try to generate some code. But the question for me really stands at what happens if you're a .NET developer or a PHP Laravel developer or I don't know, a Django developer or a WordPress developer or any single thing that is not sort of like common to sort of like the modern framework type of architecture. How do you work around these issues and how do you build something that is sort of substantial in production ready environments? And so that's kind of really what my talk is about here. So let me show you what I mean just so you can understand very quickly. So here I'm on Bolt.new and I ask it a very simple question. Can you build me a .NET application that is a to-do Blazor application? Now, interestingly enough, Bolt.new will actually try to attempt to do this. Now, in the past I just noticed this, that it used to actually try to generate code. And what I would notice is that halfway through the code, it would kind of switch from .NET to React to TypeScript, etc. And now it's just saying that I can build you. So if I say yes, okay, and I tell it I would like it to build me a Blazor application, it's almost like I have to work against the model in order to get it to do something. And it will try, but what I'll tell you for certainty, because I've done this before, is that by the end of this code, it will almost become unusable because it's going to literally embed Nuxt code or React code inside of the template, which makes it basically completely useless. So this is a fundamental problem that I'm seeing with all these models. Now, same thing, if you go to Lovable, which is also another code generation tool, and you try it, it just literally just outright just refuses. It's like, listen, we only deal with React and VTair in this particular case, and Tailwind and TypeScript. That is the only single thing that we will generate. We won't even try. And what I find interesting about this is that this is a LLM. It's a large language model. It's literally capable of writing any language, but yet we've developed this artificial restriction on the models to ensure that it only produces stuff that we want it to produce because we have bias towards a specific type of language. This is a problem. This is a problem for multiple reasons. I'd say the biggest one being that, number one, not all developers are JavaScript developers. Number two, not all developers are Next React developers. Some of us actually write vanilla JS, heaven forbid, or I don't know, jQuery or something, right? V0 on the other hand, now, interestingly enough, this is new to me because I've tried this multiple times in the past, and normally Normally, they just happily start writing code and the model just kind of just break down because it doesn't do it. However, I don't know what's happened, but definitely for sure in the last couple of days, these models have just all decided that they're not even going to write any code for you if you're doing it in another language. So that's kind of the problem. And this is kind of a monoculture that's sort of evolving as a result of these LLMs in place. And the question is, what do we do about it? So let's just talk quickly about why this is becoming sort of a pandemic, at least in my opinion. Number one is that it's really wiping out diversity. The whole ecosystem that the web was built on, the sort of like nature that anybody could create their own language and do their own thing, that's kind of going away. And we're all sort of building the same set of UI, the same set of look and feel, the same set of components that you could just look at a website and kind of know that it was built with AI. At least in my opinion. So I think that wiping out that diversity in terms of the ecosystem is not good at all. This is just a real problem altogether. And the reality is that it creates sort of a monotone type of environment. And, I'm going to make a pandemic joke here where it essentially weakens the host, aka the developer, because now you're just kind of whatever the AI gives you, you're kind of taking rather than being creative in the language or the tools that you've been accustomed to, right? So I think we need a vaccine, okay? Maybe my jokes are a little bit too close to the pandemic. I think it's a couple of years now, so it's safe to make a joke here. But is it that we should sit and just accept the fact that Nuxt's Next.js code has won? Personally, I refuse to give up and even acknowledge the fact that Next has won the battle. And I'll give you my personal justifications for it. I'm a diehard fan of the Nuxt framework, this framework right here. They just released version 3.0. It is extremely elegant and it's extremely what I would consider simple than Next.js. This is obviously subjective. If you're a Next.js developer, you're probably going to argue with me on this, and that's cool too. Bring your opinions. We're happy to have a discussion here. This is a safe place. That being said, Nuxt has solved a lot of the problems that I'm seeing in the Next.js community. And I'm not an expert in Next.js, so I can't really say that for sure. But what I will say is that if you're a Next.js developer and you come across to Nuxt, you'll see that a lot of the things that you kind of had to think about are just sort of like fleshed out and thought out, and they just gave you a solution for it right out of the box. And so I just find that to be sort of a refreshing approach. And for this reason, I refuse to write any of my applications in Next.js. I just feel like I'm making a backward step. Again, subjective here. That being said though, where I think Next.js is winning this battle is that they have some really phenomenal UI frameworks that are very, very popular. One of the best UI frameworks that I'm seeing from the Next.js community or the React community is this ShadCN framework, and it's really, really well fleshed out. We do have a framework like this called Nuxt UI, and that is also a pretty good framework, but the truth is it's not as full-fledged as the Next framework. And what I've noticed is that the AI models have a little bit more harder time implementing sort of this framework. If you're a new developer and you're trying to build a vibe coding app, my personal opinion is of the fact that Next and React is a much more complicated language for you to sort of build your front-end application is. You have to learn a lot of details. There's just a higher bar in terms of like the knowledge required in order to properly build out a Next.js application. And I would argue that Next.js is significantly simpler. Not to mention the fact that the guy that invented Nuxt.js is Evan You, who is also the founder of Vite. And Vite is now becoming sort of the de facto standard across the internet. My belief is that over time, this conversion of Vite and arguably Nuxt will create a sort of a much better ecosystem. Now, my understanding is that Next.js, they had some conversations with the Vite guys around trying to port their platform over to Vite, but I think there's just too much complexity there. So you're always going to have this sort of ecosystem siloed, at least for my understanding of this. Now, the question is, why does this matter? That's really what it boils down to. And I think it matters for a couple of reasons. The primary one being that having sort of a broader ecosystem around various different developer tools, all in all, the reality is that having that diversity in the ecosystem literally creates innovation. And if you have innovation across the board, it just leads to better competition. And I'm a big believer of may the best tool win, may the best product win kind of deal. Actually, Bolt decided to do something here. Let's see what it did. Yeah, so there you have it, right? I asked for a .NET application. It's giving me React code. Okay. So this is just a flawed problem with all of these models altogether. And as a result of this, I've been pushing back on this approach very much. I'm trying to figure out, like, how do we approach this if you're a non-JavaScript type level developer altogether? The question is really, what can you do to get the speed of some of these platforms, but also not be locked into using Next.js as a platform altogether? And for me, it boils down to a couple of things. Number one is you're just going to be forced to be a little bit slower. That's a reality. Now, I'm going to give you some options on how you could get around that, but let's just talk about that for a second. You're going to be a little bit slower in spinning up an application. Personally, I have one goal. My goal is to be able to develop within a week production grade application that are vibe coded. And you should be able to spin up a production grade application in about a week's time. Okay. And obviously that's a really high bar, but that's sort of the speed that I'm trying to develop, and not on a Next.js platform, which makes it tricky. So let's talk about what are your options if you're trying to build up a platform and you're trying to do some sort of vibe coding and you're not a Next.js developer. What are your options altogether? So because you don't have actually access to the all-in-one sort of Gen AI tools that exist on the market, you're going to be forced to do a lot of the AI yourself. Now, this is actually a good thing and a bad thing. One of the problems with having a generative AI tool do your UI is that whatever you get is whatever the model generates. However, if you were to separate your UI generation from your actual code generation, then you could actually find yourself in a better position where you have more control over the look and feel of the application, which is something that really matters depending on how fast you want to go. Now, this might not necessarily be the first choice if you're just trying to get something quick and dirty out the door. But if you're really trying to build out a full-fledged application, then this definitely is the way to go altogether. The first tool that I will say has surprised me, honestly, on how to do this properly is Google Sketch. It's very good. And it does a couple of things that's really well. Number one is you kind of give it sort of like in this case, I said, give it a to-do application, and it just sort of came up with what exactly it's going to build. And then it kind of came up with some screens. Now, the cool thing is that the screen UI that it creates is not like a static application. It's actually a full application. So if you notice here, I could turn that into a desktop version. And then I have the ability to actually view the code, and the code that it generates, this is the most important part, is pure HTML. So what I told it to do was generate the code and use Tailwind CSS as sort of the foundation. And this is what makes this really interesting, because at the end of the day, you're getting a real code. Now it does have a Figma button, so you could export it into Figma. I haven't had too much success with that in the sense that some things kind of get transferred incorrectly. But using it as a pure UX tool to kind of generate UI and then being able to bring that into your application makes a lot of sense. So this is definitely by far one of the better options that I've had. What I will say is that you have to kind of nudge it a little bit in terms of like influencing it to use certain styles. So tell it to use Tailwind CSS, tell it to use some other UI framework. And I think you're going to get a better shot, because normally, at least from my experience so far, when you don't give it instructions on what kind of UI language to use, the design is kind of very poor. It's very primitive, actually. And then the other one that's kind of surprising me right now is Figma. So it turns out that Figma is obviously trying to push into the generative AI space as well too. And they have a UI tool. So here I said, build a to-do list application, HTML, Tailwind design language with Next UX. And it did exactly that. So it did give me something that looks pretty decent. And more importantly, the code, see here, the code is TSX, which is the problem. Same exact problem that we talked about before. That being said, what I've been able to do is I could tell it, like, can you convert this to Nuxt? And it does a pretty good job. It'll actually take every one of the styling and it'll actually convert it to Nuxt, which is pretty cool. And then what I normally tell it to do is just kind of delete the TSX file. So this one's actually a pretty good tool altogether, and I think it has lots of potential. The good news is that it's trainable, right? Like you could tell it to do one thing, it's still kind of generating React code But then see here, I could just tell it to create a Vue.js version, and you could compare. Now, let's just do that right off the top here. So let's just compare when it's finished, hopefully finished soon. But we'll compare what a Vue.js file looks like to a TSX file. While I have this open up, I might as well just do the comparison. So if you notice, the reason why I personally like Vue.js is because the HTML is 100% separated from the JavaScript and the HTML, the CSS. And I just think that's just a better design principle philosophy. It's very simple and it's elegant in its nature. And again, I'm very opinionated here, but it's just a better, cleaner UI interface than having all of this JavaScript and intermingle with the HTML, right? So with that, this is probably one of the better tools that I've seen. I've been able to get some half decent success with the Figma tool. Again, you have to kind of nudge it a little bit into doing more things. If you don't want to deal with that, you just want to deal with getting all your UI in place. Google Stitch is very good at what it does. And then you could take that HTML one by one and put it into a pure HTML section of your app. And from there, tell it to reference this HTML to be able to continue building out the application. So that's how I would actually use those two platforms all together. Once you actually get your application initially generated, assuming that you got a UI, you could put it in a UX folder of some sort or some sort of HTML folder and then have it referenced. From there, you just a GitHub Copilot, which is fantastic, or Cursor or any of the other tools. And from there, they'll take it on pretty well and they're not going to be as biased with the generation of the code. Believe it or not, ChatGPT still to this day is one of the best frameworks in terms of being able to do vibe coding. And they've bring some more interesting stuff. But more specifically, if you're trying to do this right, the first thing I would recommend is using Codex. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So if you were to create a new GitHub project, so let's do this, switch over. So here I created a brand new GitHub project here 70 minutes ago. And what I did is I went over to Codex and then I was able to connect my Codex to that application. And then I asked it to build me a .NET application. And in doing so, it was able to build out an application altogether. So here now I could just do create a PR. And what I will do is allow me to create a PR, push it back into my main branch. So let's see the PR in a second here. View PR. So here I have my PR for the code that it just created. And I'm just going to click on merge PR and pull that into my branch. And so that's probably one of the best ways that if you're doing a non-Next application, you're trying to vibe code sort of an initial scaffold for a project. This is actually a really solid solution and implementation to kind of get that. So you see, it will do the right thing because OpenAI is significantly more, so it's doing the right thing, it's creating the Razor pages, etc., etc. The question is, why would you want to do this and not just to create new? Because if you pair this with sort of the principle that I've been talking about with vibe coding, which is to talk to the AI, create a PRD document, create a task list, create a feature request, and then basically use that to create your scaffolding for your entire project, you would notice that you'd be able to get significantly further. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch my video on vibe coding from beginner to pro. It'll kind of give you some of that foundational knowledge that I'm talking about here. So with that, this is by far one of the better approach that you could use if you're trying to do vibe coding and you're trying to figure out how to scaffold a project and you're not a Next.js developer altogether. So that's number one. The second tool that I'll say off the top is there's this company called Worky, or if I'm saying that correct, Worky, I think. And this seems to be trying to sell the same vision, which is sort of like giving you the option to do sort of a vibe coded platform that is platform agnostic, where you could program any single thing. I did try it. I don't have a lot of experience with it, but I did actually try it and use it. And I was able to kind of get sort of an application kind of going. Where's my project here? This way. And again, I'm using .NET as sort of like an example, but I was able to program it. The downside that I'm seeing here, it doesn't have sort of tight integration with GitHub and some of the other stuff. So just kind of keep that in mind. You could kind of download the plan. Now, mind you, I have a sort of a free plan. So I can't say too much about this tool, but definitely worth checking out if you're trying to sort of vibe code. But like I said, the Codex application is sort of the winner in the block right now. DeepSeek is still a good example also, because again, it's sort of a general sort of untouched. That's what we're trying to get rid of. We don't want to be the person that's copying the code and putting it into our sort of IDE. We just want the AI to kind of create those code. And so this is not necessarily the best option, but it is an option altogether. Okay. If none of those solutions work for you, I think honestly, we're going to have to start seeing more developers build out their own solution for scaffolding their own project. So in other words, you start by scaffolding out your project, or you use an existing project and trim it down to create sort of like a template. And then you use that to train a model to help you create more projects altogether that will give you sort of the foundation. I think this is a good idea for people that are doing like website development for companies. You're pumping out tons and tons of these applications and you're doing it in a language as not Next.js. That would be the way to go. The application that I would tell you to check out right now, the platform, is Cloudflare. They now have a AI vibe coding platform that you could actually deploy in one click. It literally gives you an entire vibe coding system that you could just spin up all together. If you click here, go through their blogs, look at their demo application, it allows you to sort of build out your own vibe coded demo application. Now, I do think that you're going to have to do some work to program this a little bit more to not get it to do Next.js code. That being said though, the good news is that it's your platform, so you could really fine-tune the model and fine-tune the instructions to tell it exactly what to do. And I think this is a really cool application and implementation that gives you sort of like your own isolated environment that you could do this properly. And the cool thing is, as a one-click sort of deployment, you could fork the branch on Cloudflare and then continue working on it, which I think is really cool. So I'm demanding that we need to create some sort of solution, a vaccine, if you will, for this problem, because we got to solve this problem as fast as possible. Not just give us some sort of temporary workaround. Like, we actually need real solutions in order to solve this. Else the entire web as we know it will basically turn into a Next.js application. Frankly, I will not like that. Hopefully you won't too. So anyway, with that, I hope that you gotten some value from this video. If you have, please like and subscribe to this video. I'm trying to grow this channel. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in another video.